Hello there and welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon, your guide to the wider Star Wars canon through the comic book lens. And to take you on this journey, I'm your host, Mike Burton. So jumping right in, this week I'm actually going to be talking about two comics. Both of them are actually written by Ben Acker as well as Ben Blacker. They're also about characters or events around The Last Jedi, and they were both released after The Last Jedi, and in fact in the back of one of them it actually advertises next issue is the other one. So I'm going to be speaking about the comics Storms of Crait, and the other one is DJ Most Wanted. Storms of Crait is basically the salty planet on Last Jedi, where it's very nicely visual scenes where you get the speeders going across and there's that red soil smoky stuff coming up, and that's where Luke and Kylo had their little fight thing. Well, Luke's hologram had the fight thing. And DJ Most Wanted, DJ is actually the codebreaker and air quotes hacker in Last Jedi that helped Rose and Finn get on the Superstar Destroyer. He is the one with the stutter and is played by Benicio del Toro. And in this one, I'm basically going to talk about Storms of Crait first, and then once I've kind of said what I want to say about that, I'll then move on to DJ Most Wanted. So here we go. So, as I've already stated, the Storms of Crait was written by both Ben Acker as well as Ben Blacker. However, Storms of Crait has got the artist Mike Mayhew, who I believe drew it and also coloured it. The issue came out on the 27th of December 2017, which is only a week or so after Last Jedi came out. It's set between 0 and 1 ABY, after the Battle of Yavin, so it's basically set between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. It centres around Leia, Han, Chewie and Luke, and it's about them basically escaping the Empire and trying to find a new rebel base. Now, any fans of the main Star Wars line of comics, which finished with the Empire Ascendant comic, as well as a crossover with Bounty Hunters and Dr. Aphra, that ran for about 75 issues. That then finished, and then the new Star Wars run, which I think is on about issue 4, came out as well. Now, the reason I mention these is because the main Star Wars run, which was the first comic series to start after the new canon and that sort of thing, that's set between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, and it's basically just over the couple years what Han, Leia, Chewie and Luke all got up to between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. This comic fits within there. I looked online for the timeline, and what it seems to be is it's before issue 56 of the main line, which is before book 12, book 12 is the 12th story arc within the series, and is before volume 10. And obviously when the comics come out, every arc or so is released as sort of an annual or a volume. So this is basically set between volume 9 and 10. It's obviously where's issue 56, like before issue 56 of a 75 issue run. It's about 2/3 or so through the series, but it works as a one shot. You don't need to read any of the other Star Wars comics or anything, and it goes really nicely with the film Last Jedi. Now, before getting to the content, I do just want to say a really big praise to Mike Mayhew, because I think Storms of Crait may have the best artwork, as in drawings within it, of maybe any Star Wars comic I've read. Now, I haven't read the Poe Dameron series, and the main line of Star Wars comics I picked up from issue 30. I'm going to buy the backlog and go into that at a future date. But apart from that, I've read pretty much all of them, or at least I own pretty much all of them, so I've seen relatively all of them in bits and pieces to some degree. But the artwork inside the comic itself, the drawings of Han, Leia and Luke, their faces specifically, are done so well, it looks like a photo that someone's traced over. Now, that may have actually happened. I don't know Mike Mayhew's method, but I just want to say with the Storms of Crait, where it's just a one-off comic and it's a quite fun thing to go with Last Jedi, it's generally a good comic. It's not one of the best one-shots, but the artwork itself is just amazing, and I just wanted to tell everyone about that basically. So just to reiterate what I said slightly earlier, Crait is a small salty mineral planet in the Outer Rim. We saw it in The Last Jedi. It was the little ships that were escaping from the big cruiser that Holdo was in. Holdo is the lady with the purple hair. I'm trying to make this accessible for people who don't know everyone's names. So the lady with the purple hair in The Last Jedi called Vice Admiral Holdo. She got onto the ship, the Radis, and tried to kind of get all the little ships to hide and go off to Crait. The First Order obviously saw this happen because DJ basically ruined the plan when he got captured along with Finn and Rose. And so when they were getting shot, she went into hyperspace and shattered herself, as hit all the First Order fleet and things. When that happened, they obviously escaped to this planet Crait, which is the salty planet, which has got a lot of red soil. It's quite visually appealing, the Battle of Crait, and that's where Kylo Ren and Luke had their sort of, I say fight, but it was when Luke was a hologram. So that's what Crait is. Now, Crait did actually first appear in the Journey to the Last Jedi book, Leia Princess of Alderaan. That's basically it's a story set around when Leia was about 16 years old, and it's basically when she found out that her dad, Bail Organa, was part of the rebellion. That book was written by Claudia Gray. I haven't read it, but there's a book that I'm right near finishing now called Bloodline. It's about Leia between episodes 6 and 7, and that's written by Claudia Gray as well. So I highly recommend that book, which I may do an episode on some point further down the line. Who knows? I'll give a couple of basically bullet points about what the plot of this comic is. I will say that, as I said in the start, this isn't an amazing one-shot comic in the sense of, oh yeah, you need to read this to really appreciate it. There's a couple of other one-shot comics which are really, really cool and definitely worth a read, but this one-shot comic, it is good. It's got some really cool little moments in, and I would recommend it. And I said the art in it itself is absolutely fantastic, but there's got a little bit of Wedge Antilles in there, and who doesn't love a bit of Wedge? You've got the Scar Squadron sort of pop up in there. Anyone who reads the Star Wars comics will know who Scar Squadron is. I'll go into a little bit more detail about them later. And it is just interesting seeing the little troop essentially of Han Solo and Leia, as well as Chewie, all kind of interacting with themselves when they're not as comfortable with each other. Because obviously when you see them in New Hope, that's when they first meet. In Empire, they'd already been associated with each other for a couple years, and then, Return of the Jedi 6 months after that. So the 5th and 6th Star Wars films are quite close, but there is quite a wide gap between episodes 4 and 5. So it's quite nice to kind of see that, especially if you're not one who's reading all the Star Wars mainline comics. So basically just a couple of bullet points. It was after the Battle of Yavin, the rebels have been fleeing the Empire, searching for a new base, and they keep finding temporary bases, and the Empire keeps tracking them, blah, blah, blah. So essentially, Mon Mothma and Leia basically are having a dispute, and essentially Leia says, look, I'll go find out. You don't have to worry about any more resources. I'll just take a couple of my favourites, essentially, because she takes Luke and Han, and they take one ship, and they basically just go trying to find a few places. They mentioned a couple, just in a sort of dialogue between them. They said no to all of them, and then they said about Crait, they're a bit uncertain because they mentioned Trusk Berinato, and that person was an associate. He knew Leia's father, Bail Organa, before, and Mon Mothma has some reservations about him. Leia says she's willing to give it a go, so they basically go off to this planet. I will just say that Mon Mothma is a very important character in Star Wars. She's not in the movies very much at all. She's in Rogue One a fair amount. Her and Bail have like a little conversation, and Mon Mothma also speaks to Jyn Erso and basically kind of tells her what's been going on really with her dad and the Death Star, that sort of thing. And Mon Mothma is also, she's in the Clone Wars series a fair amount, and in Star Wars Rebels a fair amount. She is the senator for the planet Shangri-La, and that planet is heavily featured in the Aftermath trilogy, which is set like within the year after Return of the Jedi finishes. I really recommend the Aftermath trilogy. I will be, I think, doing an episode about the Aftermath trilogy at some point, but obviously this is mainly a comics, which is called, Star Wars Comics and Canon, so I'm trying to stick primarily to the comics. But yeah, Mon Mothma, senator, she's very important. She was actually the first person to publicly speak out against Palpatine when he turned the Senate into the Galactic Empire, and she's always been working with Bail Organa to kind of push the rebellion forward, get it going. She's been helping it while trying to keep a public figure and things. So in the normal films, she's not in it very much, but as I said, in the more expanded sort of canon, she's in it quite heavily. With all the works that I've read with Leia in it, she's a close friend of Leia's. So in the Aftermath trilogy, she's mentioned a few times. In the Bloodline book, she's in it quite a bit. And in these comics, whenever Leia has some sort of communication with the rebellion, Mon Mothma's the person she speaks with. And just for clarity, if you're unsure who I'm speaking of, Mon Mothma is a red-headed or ginger-haired, sort of tall, pale woman, and she wears quite a lot of white. That's more or less it. She's very softly spoken as well. So she is in A New Hope. I believe she's the one who, kind of at the start, gives a little bit of a brief presentation about the Death Star plans before the gentleman kind of comes in and gives a bit more detail. So she is in the films. She's just not in it a huge amount. Anyway, so on Crait, they basically get down there. They already knew the planet was inhospitable, or inhabitable rather. Inhospitable would come hand in hand with that, I suppose. But the planet's got some issues there. So they go down there. Leia speaks with this gentleman called Trusk Baranato. And Luke and Wedge basically scope the area. They come across these kind of worm things that come out the floor with big teeth. And then Wedge is about to shoot one. And Luke says, look, don't shoot it. We've got these kind of things on Tatooine. You know, if you attack one, they're all going to come for you. And then it's worse, so just leave them to it. While that's happening, Leia is talking to Trusk. Luke basically finds out about these salt storms which are happening on Crait, which is like a sandstorm, but of salt. So, you know. And basically Leia says to Trusk, look, I know you've got stormtroopers hidden. I know you're working with the Empire. This is your chance to not betray us. Do what my father believed you were capable of in the sense of being a good person and see where that goes. And Trusk basically says that they're already on their way. Tough. So they get betrayed. Leia kind of, already expected that sort of thing. And this group of stormtroopers called Scar Squadron show up. Now, Scar Squadron are heavily featured in these Star Wars comics, the main run of comics I've mentioned, and they're kind of a bit like the Bad Batch. If you've been watching the new season of the Clone Wars, there's basically one that's really big and brutish, there's one that's a bit techie, there's the leader, and the leader does actually have a lightsaber as well. I do not believe he's force sensitive. I think he just has it. I'm not quite sure how he got it. I should have looked it up before saying this. But yeah, Scar Squadron, basically a stormtrooper with a lightsaber leading a few other, in air quotes, elite stormtroopers, and they basically chasing down Han, Luke and Leia since A New Hope. So they show up, they all fight, and the heroes win, and yeah, that's basically it without going into like reading verbatim all the text and things. And essentially, while Leia's trying to talk to Trusk, he pulls a gun, and Han is basically there saying, no, don't shoot her, and he's trying to kind of distract Trusk. He's about to pull his firearm out, and then Trusk shoots him in the shoulder. Leia grabs Han's gun, shoots Trusk, I think, in the hand, and then basically they leave. Then after, at the end, Leia and Mon Mothma talk. Leia says it's a shame because I really hoped he would turn good, and then Mon Mothma says something like, it's fine. One of your best qualities is seeing the best in people. Keep at that. Leia says something nice about the people she's with, and also Han taking a bullet, essentially, for a bullet, taking like a laser shot for Leia. That's kind of showing in earlier stages of his feelings for her. She makes like a joke about it earlier in the comic about him caring about her, and he gets really defensive about it. And that's more or less the comic. I will say there's one other part in this which I quite like, which is with Wedge Antilles. And at one point, they're fighting Scar Squadron, and Wedge gets one of the stormtroopers down and picks up this sheet of metal sort of thing. I think it's from like a broken starship or something. And he's basically screaming at a stormtrooper saying, you know who we are? We're Red Squadron. We blew up the Death Star. And he's like smashing the stormtrooper's helmet in, like while he's wearing it, he's like smashing his head in. And it's quite a cool scene because you've got the salt storm basically starting to pick up, and it looks like it's raining, obviously it's salt. And you've got him standing there with a bit of blood on his face, like screaming at the stormtrooper, like bashing his head in. And it's like, Jesus, it's just a really cool little panel. And as I said, the artwork in this comic is one of the best that I've ever seen in the Star Wars comics. So almost that little panel alone is almost worth it. So it's just, if you're a big Wedge Antilles fan, which who isn't, then yeah, it's just a really cool comic for him. As I said, that's more or less it for this comic. This is one of the reasons I wanted to do a double feature, because I do want to talk about certain one-shots, but a lot of the time one-shots don't have enough proper depth to actually substantiate a whole episode, but they do have lots of little tidbits and things that are quite interesting. So I just thought I'd sprinkle a bit of trivia and stuff like that around Crait and that sort of thing, and a little bit of information of what the Rebels were doing between episodes 4 and 5, if you weren't already aware. So that being said, I'm going to now move on to the second comic, which is DJ Most Wanted. Now, this was, once again, written by Ben Acker and Ben Blacker, which I just find that funny that there's two guys called Ben, and one of them's surname is Acker, and the other one's surname is Blacker. It makes me giggle. But essentially, those two are the writers, and I looked online, and it's got I've got my comic here, and it's got 5 people's names on the front, which is normally got the writer, the artist, and the colourer, or something like that. This has 5 people, so I'm going to read all the names out. So, as I said, the two Bens, then you've got the penciler, which is Kev Walker, you've got the inker, which is Marc Deering, and then you've got the colorist, which is Java Tartaglia. This comic was released on January 31st, 2018. It's set like within a day or so of the events of The Last Jedi. The very last panel is a shot of the ship that Rose and Finn are on, heading to the Canto Bight, which is the casino in Last Jedi. And so that's where it is on the timeline, which is 34 years after the Battle of Yavin, because, Force Awakens and Last Jedi happened within days of each other. So both of those are in the year 34 ABY, after the Battle of Yavin. Now, looking online, I couldn't actually find much cool information about DJ that isn't directly in this comic, because he's only in this comic and the film itself. But one thing I found that's quite cool is DJ is not his actual name, but DJ is actually short for Don't Join, which is actually synonymous with his own sort of life motto, which is he doesn't see the good or the bad. He just thinks everything is this big grey area. And obviously in Last Jedi, he speaks with Finn quite a lot about that. When they're on the ship and they're speaking about, what kind of, you stole the ship. Finn saying to DJ, you stole the ship, you're a bad person. And he's like, well, you don't know. Let's see if this person's a good person or not. And then it's like, oh, he sells to the bad guys, and there's pictures of TIE fighters and things. And then Finn's kind of a bit smug, and then he clicks to the next hologram, and it's sending an X-Wing. And then it's like Finn's a bit taken aback by that. And DJ's like, look, there's no good or bad. It's just different people with different perspectives, all fighting basically for the same thing. And in this comic, it really hits home with that, because there's one of those inner monologues in the comic, which I loved in the Darth Maul comic, and I quite like it in stories about characters that aren't main ones, because you get a lot more of a feel of what the character is actually like. I would actually quite like DJ to show up in other Star Wars content, because I think he's actually quite a cool character. And in this comic, they did also keep his stutter, so that's one of the ways to remember him in Last Jedi. He is played by Benicio del Toro. He has a stutter, and he's on Canto Bight. So Canto Bight is actually the sort of main city of the Cantonica planet. Canto Bight is the casino place that Finn and Rose go to. And one thing I found interesting, which is actually mentioned within this, is that the jurisdiction on Canto Bight actually favours the casinos. So that's quite an interesting part within this comic, which I'll get into a little bit more in a second. But it's just quite interesting having a casino, and obviously a lot of Star Wars tries to sort of cleverly, or tries to be subtle sometimes, to parallel real life and parallel some of the political discourse and things without actually taking a necessary political stance. And in this one, basically saying that money overrules morality is quite an interesting thing to have on essentially a city which is obviously all casinos, relatively speaking. So it's quite interesting in that regard, and I thought I'd just throw it in there. And now I'm just going to get into some of the story and things. So as I said, DJ does have an inner monologue throughout the whole of this comic, which I really liked. And the comic itself, I would say, is a pretty good comic. If you're only getting one of the two between this and the Storms of Crait, I would say the Storms of Crait has some more interesting moments in it. And there's some quite cool scenes, and the artist, the drawings and things within it, in my opinion, are better. But I would say that purely on the plot basis, the DJ one has a bit more to it, because Storms of Crait is a bit predictable, because obviously it's 3 characters set between 4 and 5. They can't really do that much with them, in one comic at least, because they wouldn't die or anything like that. So that's kind of why I'd say maybe plot-wise the DJ one's a bit more interesting, but obviously the plot is only adding to the character DJ, where Storms of Crait kind of adds to everyone's favourite troop. So just thought I'd throw that in there before I say the story, but here it goes. So DJ is in the casino gambling. He's got this sort of bookie next to him that's a droid that's telling him, if you do this, it's going to be 37% chance of failure. If you do this, it's going to be, blah, blah, blah. DJ completely ignores him and basically does his own thing. He loses almost all of his chips quite quickly, and the droid's like, see what you're doing? The amount of money you lost was absolutely ridiculous. It's a huge amount of money. And DJ's like, oh well. And he's like, oh well, how much money do you have? And that kind of goes on a little bit. And then DJ, he gets a drink from a waitress and he tips her, and the droid's like, what? You just gave a third of your chips to this waitress. Why have you done that? You barely got any money left. And then he gives all of his chips except for one just to the dealer, who's a female Zabrak. Zabrak is the species that Darth Maul is, essentially, but I'm not going to get too deep into that. He gives that to her, and then he's only got one chip left. And the droid's like, well, you've only got one chip left, what are you doing? Then some detectives go over to DJ, basically tell the droid to move along and shove it, and they're quite rude to him and push him away and things. And they sit down and speak to DJ. Now, they speak to him and say that a saint, as well as a gangster, have had money stolen. The saint is a woman who's giving water to sort of desert planets, and the gangster is a Rodian. Now, the reason I mention that is a Rodian is quite a common species in Star Wars. The most famous Rodian character is Greedo. Greedo being the one that Han shot in Mos Eisley Cantina in A New Hope, with that notorious thing, Han shot first, Greedo shot first, and obviously Lucas keeps editing the film and changing it. But Rodian, it's a green, large-eyed, little antenna on the top of their head, sort of humanoid creature. That's what this gangster was. So they basically had this money stolen by someone called Denell Strench, and when they start talking to DJ about these sort of things, the casino owner basically comes over and says, look, this guy's spending a lot of money here, can you leave please, go away. And that's a part where DJ is in a monologue says jurisdiction on Canto Bight favours the casinos. So if a casino owner tells the police, or detectives rather, to leave a casino, they will actually leave the casino, which is really bizarre, but it's quite a funny sort of parallel to life with, rich people getting away with XYZ. But anyway. It is then confirmed that DJ's inner thoughts show that he was actually cheating. The money that he, in air quotes, lost was basically coded to put a virus into the system just so he would then win. And the kind of way it works is the more money he puts in, the more money he gets out. Because, obviously Star Wars is all techie and holograms, all that kind of craziness, he just hacks into the system by giving these chips that have got a virus on, and it makes him win constantly. So he does that, and then he leaves the casino after getting quite a lot of money and things. The detectives come back and stop him. Then the casino owner comes out, as well as hotel security for another place come out, and they all kind of are talking, and the casino owner's like, I know you did something, and the detective's like, look, I want to talk to you about this stuff. And this hotel security from another casino/hotel basically come over, and they start threatening the detectives and the casino owner and saying, look, this guy's paid for our security. We're going to take him to our casino so he can spend money. He's a high roller. We're taking him. That's that. Casino owner basically goes, fine, deal with the problem, whatever. I'm not going to handle it anymore. I don't want some sort of big horrendous rivalry. And the detectives want to get back off. So he goes into this new casino. He cons them like he did with the other ones. And then the Rhodian gangster that was mentioned earlier, says that Denell Strench freed him. And he goes up to DJ, he's like threatening him and stuff, and yeah, he mentions that Denell Strench was the one who freed him. DJ goes to leave, and then the hotel security say that Denell Strench gave away DJ's con. So DJ basically flees so he can basically get away and things, and he gets caught by the Canto police. So because he says, well, if I get in a monologue, he says, if I get caught by the police, I'm just going to get basically put in jail. If I get caught by the hotels that have caught me cheating, they get to dish out their own form of justice, which is heavily insinuated to be incredible violence. I think one of the hotel security guys even says about breaking all the bones in DJ's body and things. So he chooses to get arrested and just locked up instead of being killed, essentially. Now, while DJ's sort of fleeing and things and trying to work out what the hell's going on, it shows you where the droid that at the start was pushed away. He goes through DJ's things and finds the file on Denell Strench, and he actually becomes this persona before being shot by the detectives. Now, this is the part where I say the plot is actually really interesting, and I try not to spoil things when it's comics, but when it's a one-shot, it's quite hard to talk about a plot when you can't, without spoiling it, essentially. So if you are really planning on reading DJ Most Wanted, it was still really enjoyable, but this is the sort of little air quotes twist, so just warning you before I go any further. Essentially, Denell Strench is a character that DJ created. He's not an actual person, it's a persona he's created, and he manages to con his way and blame a lot of the things on Denell Strench. That's why the detectives speak to him at the start, because when he stole the money from the Rhodian gangster and when he stole the money from this saint woman, it was actually through the guise of Denell Strench, so that all of the heat, essentially, would go to this illustrious gangster character who no one really knows about, but the detectives the entire time while speaking to DJ are saying, look how easy it is for us to find you. What would Denell Strench do if he found you? You're the only person who's not dead, who's still known to have worked for him. What do you think that means? He's going to come and get you, blah, blah, blah. And obviously the whole time DJ knows that he created the character, so nothing bad can happen because he created the character. But then all these weird things start to happen, and it turns out that the droid, as I said, went into DJ's stuff, picked up like the file essentially of Denell Strench and embodied that character and became that character in some odd way. They do kind of dismiss it off quite quickly, which is quite odd. I wanted to hear a bit more about it, but he essentially became this character. And when he was this character, he was the one who told both casino owners that DJ was conning them. He was the one that has been tipping people off and things like that, and why DJ's luck keeps sort of running out in air quotes. And that basically explains how he got found out, because DJ is like, well, how did anyone know I was doing these things? And that explains it. So the comic ends with DJ being locked up and him saying, there's always a way out, just be patient, it's better to be here waiting and things so I can get out eventually. I think he says, the words he uses exactly are, all I want to do is spend a week at Zord's spa and bathhouse, but any port in a storm. So obviously things are going wrong, just find somewhere where it's less bad and you'll be okay. It ends with him saying, there's no saints, there's no good or bad people, that sort of thing, and that's a very common theme in this. And as I said, it ends with seeing Finn and Rose's ship going towards the planet. And that's basically the DJ comic. As I said, the DJ comic is really good. The art in it is, I would say, not as strong as the art is in Storms of Crait, but I would say the plot is arguably better. Both the comics are fun to read. They're only one-shots and they're not terrible. They are, as I said, they are good. They are enjoyable comics. And they're fairly big-ish comics. The Storms of Crait one's around 40 pages. I think the DJ one's about 30. And it is a fun read, especially if you are a fan of The Last Jedi. I am a fan of The Last Jedi. I'm a fan of pretty much all the Star Wars films, I'd say. Some more than others. I would definitely not say Last Jedi is the strongest of the sequels, but I'm not going to go into this sort of discussion of my thoughts on all these things. But I would say that if you are a fan of the sequel trilogy, or if you just want to hear more information about Last Jedi, and everything I've said here isn't enough, the 3 comics which are the best ones would be the Captain Phasma comic that I reviewed last week, the Storms of Crait comic, and the DJ comic, because they all fit very nicely with The Last Jedi. Obviously, there's other content that fits with The Last Jedi. There's the Journey to Last Jedi set of books and comics, which the Captain Phasma book's within that. And the Leia Princess of Alderaan book is also part of that Journey to the Last Jedi thing. So a lot of these things that kind of add more information and pieces to some of the sets and stuff that is within Last Jedi. And I think that's more or less where I'm going to end it, guys. Thanks always for listening. I really appreciate you guys checking this out. Be sure to check out all the other amazing shows on the Comics in Motion channel. As I said, there's, Indie Comics Spotlight with Tony Farina, and the episode which just recently came out about the Second Coming. I'm actually on it, so huzzah, collaboration. We talk about The Second Coming. It's an absolutely incredible comic. It's about what if Jesus came back today. And there's also a character in it called Starman, who's basically Superman. And there's just a lot of really interesting stuff about religion in there. And I myself am an atheist, but I do find religion very interesting, especially Christianity and Catholicism. And it's a really, really cool comic talking about how the Old and New Testaments are quite different, really, really subtly, in a way of God is one way, Jesus is another, and them kind of being the way they are kind of showed how the Bible was written and all that sort of stuff. It sounds very religious-y. You don't have to know a lot about religion to enjoy it. In fact, it will probably help you learn more about religion, but I just want to say check out that because obviously I'm in it, self-promotion, huzzah, but it is also Indie Comics Spotlight is amazing, so go check that out. Obviously, there's also Mandatory Marvel and DC by Max Byrne, as well as the flagship podcast, Comics in Motion, so check all those lovely people out. Next week's episode of Star Wars Comics in Canon, I believe I'm going to be doing the Star Wars Allegiance comic. That is in the Journey to the Rise of Skywalker set of comics and stuff. So as you can see, I've basically been doing the Journey to comics and things. Then after that, I'm working out what I'm going to do next, because I don't want to just purely do all the comics around all the sequels and all the newer films as well, but there isn't quite as much content for some of the older stuff. There are comics and things like that for some of the prequel stuff, and obviously the mainline comics are all about the original trilogy, but I'm trying to kind of do it in some vague-ish order, I think, maybe. So I'm going to do the Star Wars Allegiance next week, unless something massive changes, and then I was thinking about doing the comics associated with Rogue One and Solo. And then after that, I may sort of jump back a bit and do the Obi-Wan and Anakin comic, because that's a really cool, well, I say graphic novel because it's a few runs, it's a mini-series. And that's actually set before Attack of the Clones, so it was after Phantom Menace. It was when Obi-Wan has Anakin as a quite young Padawan learner, and I believe it's when they go on their first proper mission together. So probably be doing that in a few weeks' time as well. But as I say, you guys, I really appreciate you listening. Please contact me on email, starwarscomicsIncanon@outlook.com, or find me on social media at Genuine Chit-Chat on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Contact me if any of you guys have any specific requests with the comics or anything like that. Let me know. I'm not promising I'd do it next week or anything, but I'd say if there are any requests for a comic that I haven't thought of doing as of yet, I'd be more than happy to kind of put that forward, think about it, and maybe do it in a future episode and stuff. So always, reach out. If there's any questions you have about any of these sort of stuff, you're more than welcome to ask me. But yeah, just appreciate you guys listening. I hope you have a great week. I hope you guys all stay safe and things, and may the Force be with you.